Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and you guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community, and a number of my subscribers have awared me of a video that OmarIsuf did, the philosopher king of YouTube fitness, about how pump work will not make you massive. So let me put on my +5 hat of Speechcraft, and let's talk about this. Alright, Omar started off in a way that I was going to agree with. But then he kind of said some stuff that makes me think that Omar still doesn't fully understand hypertrophy or training programming. Now, people say, but Omar's pretty jacked, Omar's pretty strong. He is, but he's also been training heavy for many, many, many years. Of course he is. And he's also had some decent coaches help him. And we know who some of them are. So obviously he's got pretty good results. But when we're talking about training programming like this, the things he says made me kind of think that he doesn't fully grasp the entire concept of hypertrophy or gains or how muscles grow. And people say, well, Jason, you're a strength athlete. What do you know about that? Because powerlifters and strength athletes have to train for maximum hypertrophy to be good at what we do, right? A bigger muscle is a stronger muscle. Therefore, you need to have maximum jactitude. You need to be as stacked as possible inside of your weight class to be decent at powerlifting, right? That's a requirement. So we have to understand this stuff, and coaches understand this stuff. That's kind of integral. So he kind of brought up the point that a lot of bros will do a lot of pump work because they do all this pump work and they go look in the mirror and they see those muscles pumped and they make this association in their head with acute versus chronic training response, right? If it makes the muscle get pumped up and look really good in the mirror, it must be producing really good growth. Right? And that's the idea. And he said, but that's not necessarily true because that's temporary, that's fleeting. And I'm going to go so far as to say that even a lot of the hypertrophy that we think of being associated with it is probably fleeting as well, meaning it's not lasting hypertrophy that's going to stay with you if you quit doing that pump work for a few weeks. And that's something that was observed for decades. And this is stuff that's coming back around even in the scientific literature right now. A lot of the coaches who tried to say this stuff in the past were somewhat discredited, and even I kind of looked at it and said, maybe these guys aren't right. I don't think there's that big of a set of evidence for this, but it was observed anecdotally for decades. A lot of coaches said, no, that does seem to be the case, and even researchers. And now it's coming back around. It looks like there is some of a difference between things like myofibrillar versus sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, but we know that a lot of it had to do with just transient storage factors. In other words, it's been noted for it for decades. And the bodybuilders use it to their advantage, that muscles that you train with a lot of really high rep, high volume stuff, mind-muscle connection, focusing on that, tend to store a little bit more glucose, a little more triglycerides, things like that in the short term, right? That will help them hold a little more intermuscular water. They're a little fuller, but if you quit doing that work, that goes away within a week or two. So you could do that for years and years and years, and then you quit doing it, and 2-3 weeks later, your arms are an inch smaller. They haven't lost any muscle mass. They've just lost those storage factors. But you're putting in a lot of work for something that's very, very temporary. And here's what it comes down to. That may not be useful to people who are actually trying to gain meaningful size. Now, Omar talked about a lot of them saying, look, even my programs, they're strength-based. We work with big movements, work on strength focus on them, and then I come in and do additional volume for other stuff, pump work. Now, here's my issue with that. Because he said that pump work is necessary, but that you build your bread and butter with the big lifts. And I agree with that. The big lifts are your bread and butter. But the reason we add smaller exercises is not because of the pump work. Right? People need to lose this idea that this additional stuff you're doing is causing more muscle growth than even the heavier weight could have. That's not necessarily the case. If a muscle got enough total tension and workload put on it, even doing really heavy weights for low reps, on a big exercise, it will get maximum growth. The problem is that we can't always do that beyond the novice phase. Novice lifters can do that. More advanced lifters can't. We can't. We cannot literally do enough bench pressing to maximize our tricep growth. We can't do enough total training volume on heavy benching usually to do it. And it's because you take muscles like the triceps, they get a secondary stimulus even as a primary mover versus the chest. You reach a point to where you can only handle so much training volume in a workout before your training performance degrades. And if your performance degrades, we lose the growth response from sets to a large degree. And that's the thing he mentioned too, saying, well, they do all this volume. Yeah, that's a problem. Because even if you start looking at a lot of the data out there, if you are drug-free or even a very casual user, more than about 10 total work sets for a muscle inside of a session don't seem to cause extra muscle growth. And in some cases, they seem to slightly reduce it. And this is research looking at trained lifters now. Multiple studies, men and women are coming out looking at that, and they're starting to find that, doing 15 sets, 20 sets seems to produce slightly less growth than doing 10. And those higher even do less than 5. So what we're finding is that if you're wanting to exceed about 10 sets for a given muscle group, you're going to have to do multiple workouts in the week for it. In other words, you're going to need to bench twice a week. You're going to need to train your triceps twice a week. And kind of the problem is that he used the example of saying, hey, on him on the bench, is that the bench just can't stimulate the triceps. Or I have to do this pump work for my arms. Well, it's not that. It's that we come back over to the point of you can only tolerate so much heavy benching. And let's come back over to what he said. He could do 5 sets on his bench, and his chest seems to take all of it. Well, this is what a lot of coaches are going in the direction of. When we start talking about counting training volume, when you're dealing with some big exercises, things like the triceps on the bench press, we would count it as a half a set because it's not necessarily a fantastic tricep stimulator. For a novice, you can get maximum tricep growth off of a bench. Right? That's been studied. That's not subject to debate. You can actually, if you're benching enough to maximize chest growth, your triceps are going to grow maximally. Adding tricep extensions for a novice has not been found in any research to cause more growth. It doesn't. You get more advanced, what happens is that our maximum recoverable volume and things like our minimum effective volume start changing. In other words, the more advanced you get as a lifter, the minimum amount of volume you need to stimulate new adaptation starts going up. So the same volume that got you big at a certain point is no longer going to work. Well, if you realize that triceps don't get quite as much stimulation on the bench press as the chest does, and you do 5 really good sets for bench, well, we know somewhere in the 5 to 10 set rep range in a session can produce really good hypertrophy. 10's probably, if it's quality sets, really good quality sets. 10's going to give you pretty much maximum growth. 5 will give you good growth, but it won't be anywhere near maximum. Well, if you only did 5 sets of bench, and only about half of those sets you counted as half sets for something like the triceps, and it would make sense. The triceps are not getting their minimum effective growth volume, but your chest might be. And therefore you might need some extra tricep exercises. And it's the same, look at what my bench training looks like right now. Right? Let's say my speed day. I do 5 sets of speed bench and 5 sets of incline. Well, that's still not enough tricep work, so I throw in 5 sets of tricep extensions afterwards. Right? I do 5 sets of heavy skull crushers. That gives me 5 more for my triceps, so that my chest got 10 sets. Playing the flat bench speed work. Got 5 more sets on the incline bench. But we really only got, if we can't cut it in half, that's only 5 sets for the triceps. So I add 5 more sets of tricep extensions. Right? Problem solved. But is that pump work? No. Sets of 10. Do you really get that much pump from sets of 10? I don't think of that as true pump work, and that's kind of the point I would make. He just threw pump work out there as a random term without discussing what it really means. I would say it's fine. If you want to do smaller movements, we don't need to be thinking in terms of are you getting a pump from it. We don't even need to always be thinking in terms of just training volume. It should be, are we using appropriate rep ranges to use the technique necessary to get the most out of it? I would go out on a limb and say we need to use the fewest reps possible to still achieve the tension that we want, because it comes back over to that point of tension is still a large driver of hypertrophy, isn't it? It is. It is a driver. Volume, by many people think that volume is the king. I think the data shows that volume is necessary, and up to a certain point, more volume equals more growth, and after a certain point, it seems to degrade. But tension is always a factor. So we need to be looking at what's the most tension I can get and quality reps with that tension. And so we need to be thinking in terms of, wait, what's the smallest number of reps I can do so that I can get the most weight on the bar to still maintain perfect form safely. And so this is where we get into maybe stuff like about 8 to 10, maybe up to 12, that traditional hypertrophy rep range, which we know doesn't exist now. It's all just about quality sets and tension. might be appropriate for smaller exercises. That's what I do. I do 10, right? I do 5 sets of 10 twice a week on skull crushers, right? So I get 10 extra sets for my triceps beyond my pressing every week. But I cut it off at 10. Why? Because there's no real evidence that this really high rep stuff does anything. And that's kind of the point, and that's even looking at the data. Number one, we know from observing athletes before the heavy drug abuse became to the point where it is now, nobody did more than about 10 reps. They found that 10 seemed to max out most of their growth. Going higher didn't do that much other than, again, transient storage factors. Help you get a pump. Not necessarily real growth. And then we look at the data. All the data we have only is metabolite studies showing the really high rep stuff has a benefit. I question very much, and a lot of coaches out there are questioning very much if it has any real lasting hypertrophic effect in the long term. And since that's questionable, but we know 10s work, let's do sets of 10s on your smaller exercises. Because with 10s, you can do smaller exercises without risking injury. I mean, doing skull crushers, right? Doing tricep extensions with 5 and 6 rep sets, it just has a higher risk of injury. There's no problem from a gains perspective, especially if you're using a pretty heavy weight. Form breakdown tends to be an issue, injury risk. I mean, you're doing a 5 rep max on a tricep extension, your risk of injury goes up. It just does. But benching, you can bench to a max all the time with low risk of injury, right? I do it every week. So the point we come to is that some of these smaller exercises, which we need to do to maximize growth, let's come back over again. We're just talking about benching muscles, right? Well, if we know that you're going to start exceeding your maximum ideal volume for chest hypertrophy, which you need even as a power lifter, from your pressing when you go beyond about 10 sets, and most guys are going to stop at about 7 or 8, you're going to have to do a smaller exercise for your triceps at some point in there that stimulates the chest less. It could be a very chest dominant or chest exercise that doesn't do the chest much, a JM press, right? They can hit the triceps really, really hard, much harder than the chest, and then those ratios will switch the other way. That would be half sets for chest. Or you could do a smaller exercise like skull crushers or whatever. But the point is, these smaller exercises exist so that we can reach our minimum effective volume, or maybe even get up to our maximum recoverable volume for muscles that are not getting enough total training volume from our big exercises. So there's a place for them for everybody, but what comes down to is that are you still using appropriate rep ranges for them? And then they just lend themselves better to more moderate to high reps. They just do these smaller exercises. Nobody wants to do 5 rep maxes on curls and laterals and skull crushers. It just has a higher risk of injury for no benefit because you're still going to get the muscle growth from tens. But I'm of the opinion you start going beyond that, I don't think the evidence is really there that it's going to cause any real lasting tissue changes at the muscle fiber level. Which I wish Omar had kind of defined that better, because he kind of threw that in there and was saying, oh, but it's still necessary. And I don't think the pump work is necessary. I would say that smaller exercises for a intermediate to advanced lifter do have their requirements if you're trying to maximize muscle growth. And maximizing muscle growth is usually the name of the game for everybody. I don't care what specific thing you're doing with your training, we are probably trying to maximize muscle growth, right? Whether you're powerlifting, whether you're bodybuilding, whether you're just trying to get jacked, we still need to gain muscle. And so that's all it comes down to, is simply about getting enough training volume and enough quality reps to make sure that each given muscle is in that ideal range for growth. All right, guys, so that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.